and his phone never rings. Wanders through his empty home, surrounded by his things. And silently I say a little prayer, yes I do. But for the grace of God, oh, I must have been born a lucky guy. Heaven only knows how I've been blessed with the gift of your love.
Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Story Time with Uncle Sage. Well, this might be also an addendum to my Perils of an Interesting Life autobiography. And I kind of stopped working on that for a couple of personal reasons, but because there's some painful stuff that's about to come up in the storyline, and I kind of got froze there. This happens to me when I try to write my biography, my memoirs. So instead of just trying to stick to it chronologically, I'm going to jump forward in time, and I have a lot. There's these story times with Uncle Sage fit into the category of telling my life stories because they're all true stories of my life. They're just not in chronological order, but I guess a careful biographer could put them in chronological order. That's one reason. The other reason that I haven't been doing a lot of these biography videos is because I lived an interesting life compared to everybody else of that time. But the things that we're experiencing right now in the United States of America are way more interesting than my life. Now, some of you will think my life was interesting, is still interesting, but it's kind of hard to write about yourself when history's going down right before your very eyes. But, you know, we've been in limbo for some time now. At the time I'm recording this video, it's December of 2020. And we are waiting to figure out what's going to happen next in the middle of a culture war that's about to turn into a Evil Say Orway. If you follow the channel, you know what I'm talking about. But at any rate, during this kind of downtime and during the holidays, it's got me reminiscing a little bit about my life. So I thought I would share with you an installment of my life when I was a youth pastor, kind of how I became a youth pastor and the stories that came out of that. And there's going to be a lot more stories than I can fit into one video, but this is just kind of an overview. So I got the call to the ministry while I was kind of at the peak of my career in rock and roll. And if you've seen my other videos, then you know you've probably seen the True Crossroads story video where I was approached by an emissary of, I guess you could call it the New World Order or the Illuminati. And it was like the tempting of Jesus, and they offered me the world, and I said no. And, and then I was blackballed from the music business for the most part. I just allowed to operate in the shadows, under the radar, here and there as best I could. And so, I went into church work when I had kids, and I got the call to preach, and left the music business, all kind of as a result of that interaction that I had. And so I started trying to become a preacher. And I won't go into the details of some of the struggles. With the musical talent, a church door that I knock on is always open. Man, they will bring a guy like me in, and they don't really care what I think. They just figure we'll reprogram him. We can't let him get away. Quick, throw a rope around that guy, put him over here to the piano, and chain him up to the piano bench, And so I had to deal with several preachers who really didn't want me to ever preach. They wanted me to play the piano and shut up and play the piano. And it was frustrating and heartbreaking for me. But, I kind of gave up and went back to the music business in 2001. And I left the music business in 1994. And I went back to the music business in 2001. And I was honky-tonking hard, and I was playing for an original artist and touring. He had a record deal, and that's a whole other story how that disintegrated. Have I done that video about the guy that blew his own record deal? I don't know. I have to. I think I might have alluded to it. It deserves its own video as well. You haven't heard just the tip of the iceberg of the stories of my life. But at any rate, so I go back to the music business, and the guys that I'd been playing Christian music with, because I had a Christian band. That's kind of how I tried to break into the preaching business, is by doing youth concerts, having a youth outreach band, and preaching. And there were, honestly, 4 of the 5 people in that band were adequate preachers as well as musicians. And we went into that as an evangelistic outreach. And I did that for several years and was successful at it and had some very big concerts. And some of the biggest spiritual miracles that I saw occur as a Christian occurred for me and around me and to people involved in that outreach ministry. Some of the most amazing signs and wonders. I won't go down the list too deeply, but to me, the one that always sticks out is that one night at one of my youth concerts, and it was the night when I got a chance to preach, because there were 4 preachers in the band, so we just kept taking turns at preaching, and this was my night. And we were out in East Texas at a big, I'll even name, well, I don't know, I shouldn't name the church. I won't name the town either, but it's just east of Dallas. And it's a big kind of covenant, modern day covenant love church. But anyway, charismatic, I guess. But they were Baptist at their core, because they didn't mind if charismatic things happened, but you had to run it to the back of they had a prayer room in the back where you had to send people to. And so we did the concert. I had the floor. I preached. I did the altar call. The some people at Baptist might call it the invitation. It's the thing I was best at, is getting people to talk to Jesus. I'm sorry, I'm gonna tear up. So anyway, but I'm frustrated at this place because they're not Pentecostal charismatics, they're Baptist, and they have the prayer room in the back. So when I do the call, and I even got lectured about how I should do the call, because it's really important, and that's what they called it. Really was they call it the call to repentance. We called it an altar call. Speakers call it a call to action. Get them to do something to affirm their agreement with the points in your sermon, basically. But I won't get into how the soup is made as a preacher. It's an interesting study. A lot of people think it's organic, but it's very, very well thought out. And the good ones, like my old man, it gets to be second nature. And I guess I've gotten to that point, probably on this channel before your very eyes. I was a good youth pastor preacher. I was a good preacher. I was young, but very well schooled and taught well and brought up in the ministry. But anyway, back to this night. So I'm having the altar call, and I've had this whole night of music. It's all original music. It's all written pointing towards the final thing, which is, give your life to Jesus, or change the road you're on. I mean, my recording studio and my production company were all built around the idea of right road. And you may take the right road, and turn right and go straight was one of our sayings. It's time for y'all to just turn right and go straight. And the logo was a street sign with the arrow that went up and turned right, for a hard right turn. But anyway, so I'm kind of frustrated because the whole night's led up to this moment, and I'm ready for the slam dunk. And I got probably 200 kids in a lockdown. Lockdowns used to be a good thing. That's what we called our events. I forgot that. We used to call our youth events lockdowns. Lock-ins, not lockdowns. Gosh, it's the pandemic's messed with my mind. Lock-ins. I had a couple hundred kids in a lock-in in a really big church in East Texas. And it's a great opportunity, because a lot of times in those lock-ins, you've got kids that don't go to church. They don't know Jesus. They think the world is two-dimensional, or we'll just say three-dimensional. They don't know there's a whole unseen world, right? And so anyway, I'm at this moment where I'm about to introduce him to Jesus the good way, the easy way, before life introduces him to Jesus the hard way. And And I'm frustrated because I can't go back there. I got to continue the call. I got to continue. And I'm working the band. It was up there. But the church workers in the back that were supposed to go back there and help kids say the sinner's prayer and all of that. Because like I said, it was Baptist. It's a little different thing. They weren't trying to get a breakthrough. They were just trying to get a confirmation of faith, you know. And I took my female vocalist, who I knew was another preacher's daughter and somebody who's a powerful prayer warrior. And I said, go back there and make sure this is happening right, you know. So I dismissed her and then another member of the band and said, my guitar player, and sent him back. And me and the bass player and the rhythm player, I went over and got on the keyboard, and we continued to make music and entertain the crowd and whatnot at the same time, while exonerating them to go back into the prayer area and get prayer. You know, this is your night for a breakthrough. Don't let this just be a party. That was good. So, I can't tell these stories without crying. Living like a hermit in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. It's because you got a lot of pain. If you live like that, it's because you got a lot of pain. And you got a lot of heartbreak. Good and bad heartbreak. Is there good heartbreak? Yeah, I mean, I'm so touched. I got to be that person in that moment. So anyway, okay. So I'm frustrated. I can't go back there. And finally, I turn it over to the guitar player, and I tell the drummer too. The drummer was there. I keep forgetting about the drummer. And I think it's because he was brand new, and I didn't know if I trusted him yet, you know, so he's just kind of there. I can hear the drums in my replay of the moment, but later on he would be a powerful minister in our group as well. But I turned it over to just my rhythm player, my bass player, and my drummer. And I went back with my guitar player and my singer and myself. And it was all well underway there. And I could tell, I mean, there was a lot of kids that were really having breakthroughs, and they were having a spiritual moment. And a lot of the people that were there from the church were kind of caught. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to handle it. But at the same time, you know, there was a ton of like almost like deliverance level ministry going on in that room. And but anyway, so my female singer pulls me aside and she goes, "Hey, there's a couple of kids here that are brother and sister, and the sister just pulled me to the side, and she said that she confessed to me that her and her brother, now this is about a 15-year-old girl, her and her brother, who was her fraternal twin brother, so they looked similar but not exactly the same, and they were twins, and she said her and her twin brother have a suicide pact that he's going to kill her and then he's going to kill himself. And she said, we tried to get poison, but all we could get was a gun. And, you know, we got a 22 from somewhere. It's in his closet. And this is what she told this girl, and we're going to kill ourselves. And tonight was supposed to be our big last party, and when we go home in the morning, we're going to kill ourselves. And so I went to the brother, and he was with my guitar player, and he was doing ministry with him, and he was right on the verge of talking about it too. And I just went over and I said, "So tonight's the night, huh?" And he just started breaking down and blurbing out how they were going to do this and how and why and how bad their life was and blah blah blah. Their parents were going through a divorce, a lot of stuff that seems like the end of the world when you're 14 or 15. But in the big picture of things, it's just well, what did Nietzsche say? What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. I think it was him that said that. But I believe it. You know, I embody it. I'm strong as I've ever been, and but I'm battered and beaten and scarred from it. But it does make you stronger. So, as much as this may seem like I'm a snitch, when you're a youth pastor and two kids tell you that you're about to kill yourself, you are required by law to snitch. Okay, so there was a senior pastor of the senior clergy in charge, which was an associate pastor. It was the youth pastor was there, but there was a assistant pastor that was overseeing him. It was still a young guy; he was probably 30. And but you know, I kind of got everybody together and powwowed while they did ministry with these two kids. And I did ministry with them too. And when we kind of got through it, and I told them I was going to tell. And I said, okay, I'm going to get your pastor now, And so they got intervened in that situation. They got psychological help and counseling, and we averted their suicide pact that night. So that was one of the early times when I just really got hooked on youth ministry. But I was aging. I kind of came to it later in life. My early life was career in music. And, I took that to the pinnacle until, you heard the Crossroads story. And then by that time, I was pushing 30. And by the time I was doing youth ministry, I was 30 and traveling around doing youth ministry. But I had quit doing youth ministry and gone back to the music business. And a lot of preachers have this experience. They do lay ministry and they preach and maybe they do music or they're evangelists and they travel. But then when it comes time to really commit and get licensed and become the real deal, it's time for you to sign on the line and go to the seminary and get the training and learn how to be a preacher for real and not just parrot what you've seen, but, see how the sausage is made, as it were. And you get to that point and you just kind of have a Rum Springer moment. You know what I mean? Look that word up if you don't know what it is. But you have a moment where you just think maybe I'm jumping into something. This is a big commitment. I can't go before God and take an oath and swear, that I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm going to go back to playing music. I'll just eke out a living. And that's a whole story in its own. That season where I went back to the music business, so much happened there. It's a huge part of my life, and a lot of things changed. And it was only about a year and a half. But it was while I was in the pinnacle, at the peak of this, and about to go back on the road in the tour bus and all this stuff with a signed artist. I got a call from a preacher that used to come, and sometimes we do joint events. He was a friend of my guitar players, and he was a flashy person. And I'll tell you right away, his last name was Benyon. And this guy is actually the nephew of Benny Benyon, the founder of the Horseshoe Casino and the inventor of the World Poker Tour. But Glen Benson was a fiery Pentecostal preacher, and he was every bit as flashy and flamboyant as Jerry Lee Lewis. And although Benyon could sing and turn a crowd on almost like a lounge singer, he wasn't much of a musician. I think he played a little guitar, but he kind of idolized and surrounded himself with great musicians. And this is why he was drawn to my guitar player, who's a watcher of this channel. What's up, Wombly Man? Wombat, that's what they used to call you. And just between me and you, he's also the source of the story of the Big Birds. That was him and his buddies that almost got carried off. But at any rate, this guy gives me a call, this preacher that I used to work with and do events with when I was a youth evangelist. And I'd gone back to the music business, and he called me and he wanted me to come. He'd started a church. He'd taken over a church as pastor, and he wanted me in his band. And I was like, look, man, I'm sorry. You can't afford me. I was just kind of almost, there's no almost about it. I was absolutely, it was an egotistical, kind of a jerk move. But I was just like, look, man, I'd love to come out, help you out, buddy, but I'm working in the music business for real right now. And every time I open my case, I get paid at least $100. So I'm going to need $100 minimum to play. And the problem with that is that I got to give up Friday and Saturday. I have to give up. I can work on Friday night if I play for you on Sunday morning, but I can't work on Saturday night if I can't play for you on Sunday morning. And that means I'm going to miss a gig to play for you. So I'd need at least $200 a week to come play for you at your church. And it's not that I was really wanting to come play for him at his church. At that point in my life, I was hurt. I had had several mentors who drew me in, used my talent, and then held me down. And actually, when I found out one of the previous preachers I'd been working for, not Benyon, but it's another unnamed guy. When I found out that he'd actually been blocking my licensing, he'd actually been not just not referring me, my own mentor, the guy I was working for free for, right? He was holding me down, you know. So I was not happy with the church and was walking away from that. And so this guy calls me and he says, you know, let me think about that and call you right back. And he hangs up. As soon as I say $200, he just hangs up. I'm like, well, that was weird. And really, I was just trying to get rid of him. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. And I think I went back. I was rehearsing in my home studio working on new material for the band. And when he calls me back, just maybe 5-10 minutes later, he's like, okay, I need you this Sunday. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, this Sunday, $200. Well, I thought, okay, well, I wasn't booked that weekend anyway. It was a down week. That's why I was working on the new material. It was down week all week until the weekend. And I was like, okay, I'll come make $200, you know. But what ended up happening is I ended up getting a real ministry mentor that guided me and brought me into the business of church and backed me and helped me get licensed. And he was one of the 3 ministers who ordained me as a bishop. And it takes 3 bishops. His title was bishop. It takes 3 bishops historically, according to church dogma, to ordain a bishop. So it takes 3 to make 1. All right. And it's just a confirmation that this person is legit. And so at any rate, he was there when he ordained me, or when I was ordained later on. But he put me to work in his band. I took his band over. The church grew. And when he left, when he decided to leave, honestly, I think Brother Binion got bored. And he left on to the new adventure, and he turned the church over to me. Now, I didn't really want the church because at the time I was having to commute. And also that meant my paycheck went away because the church wasn't paying my paycheck. Glen Benson was paying my paycheck because God had blessed Glen Benson with some investments. And Glen Benson had a pretty nice residual income that came in from some airwave frequencies he bought before there were cell phones. And he sold them off to the cell phone companies for a small fortune. All legal, and he just had the insight to see ahead, or God showed him. But at any rate, when he left, you know, my paycheck went with him to a great degree, and I got a demotion in pay, but I got a promotion in title. But I really wanted to start a church in my hometown, in Weatherford, where I was living. And so I did start a church in Weatherford in the afternoon, and I pastored that church on a Sunday morning. They'd never had Sunday night services. They just never took to it. It's really hard to get people to come back to church on Sunday night. So it was during that time when Sunday night services were almost completely gone. They may be almost gone nowadays. But I started having afternoon church, almost like an outreach church in Weatherford. It was doing okay, mostly a family church. But I'll leave this part of the story out. If you want to see more of it, look at the videos in my catalog here on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube. The video called I Did Battle with a Witch, Part 1, 2, and 3. And you will hear some of the in-between inside is what happened at my church there. And my family kind of imploded over a custody battle. And you know, I had a family member that was a witch. And I kind of got slapped around by the demonic in my own church, you know, because of this rift in the family and the involvement of this witch coven. And I decided after having that confrontation with the witch, which can be seen in Part 1, where she looks at me and says, well, if I'm the devil, then if I'm demonically possessed, then why don't you just rebuke me? She'd heard that growing up, you know. I rebuke that demon. I rebuke that demon. And so I said, okay, I rebuke you in Jesus' name. And she laughed this hideous laugh and goes, ha, 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 ha. Why am I not melting? And a cold shiver went up down my back, and I felt like I'd brought a knife to a gunfight. And I felt like if that didn't work, I didn't know what else to do because nobody ever taught me this part. They taught me how to take an offering. They taught me how to make you cry. They taught me how to move you emotionally. They taught me how to set the stage for a perfect praise and worship moment that leads to a crescendo and deliver the word of God and bring people to the altar. They taught me how to have church, but they never taught me how to deal with a witch. They never taught me how to deal with a demon-possessed person who was operating on the dark side, channeling dark side powers like a Sith Lord. Nobody taught me how to deal with that stuff. Stuff they don't really teach you in seminary. So, I shut my church down. And I resigned my position in my daytime church in the other town. That's nothing. That other church was farther away. It was a long drive. And so I just kind of didn't know what to do. I was like, I'm going to shut this down until I feel qualified to be a pastor. Because if I can't deal with a situation like this, I am not qualified to be a pastor. And I packed everything I owned into, or not everything I owned, everything I had in the church into the back of my truck. And I got a storage unit, and I started loading that storage unit full, trip after trip, with chairs and the tables and the projector and the I used a lot of. It's another thing that you might have seen this in the video where I talk about how my proteges had done really good, and they have this big church in Weatherford where they turn down the lights for praise and worship and have stage lights, and they light it like a concert. They learned that from me because I invented that in that little town, and when I was a youth pastor, I took that idea of and I did this when I was a youth minister and doing the concerts and the lock-ins and all that. I would set the stage and give you the atmosphere almost of a bar or a concert, because I realized, having been a secular musician, the reason they did that was to lower people's inhibitions so they were more likely to interact with the opposite sex and dance. With lower lights, you'd feel less on the spot. Why wouldn't that also precipitate a more intimate worship time with God, where you could close your eyes and not worry about what you look like or who's looking at me when my eyes are closed? And when teenagers especially are, and we're all just grown up teenagers. We're still teenagers on the inside. Even at 50, I feel like a teenager on the inside. 52. Gotta tell the truth. But almost 53. But I'm a teenager on the inside. And so they're self-conscious, and they worry about what people think of them. And so they, when you lower the lights, they tend to zero in on Jesus. And then I'd always have a couple of security guys so that when they turned down the lights, the boys didn't zero in on the girls and defeat the whole purpose of what I was trying to do. But it worked. It worked really good. It worked to bring introverted kids out of their shell and get them to actually like pray out loud or raise their hands or sing along, And so at any rate, I had lighting, I had musical gear, equipment, and I just rented a big storage unit, and I just filled it full. And I cleaned out the whole church building. I gave my notice. I turned in the key, right? And I was just dirty because I did this in one day, right, all by myself. And I got the last load of odds and ends on the back of my truck, and it's just loaded down, strapped down with rope. And I go to leave, and between the church building and the storage unit area was a church that had popped up in the old J.C. Penney's. And I decided, I just drove by there and I saw the sign. And I didn't know anything about the church, hadn't heard anything about the church, didn't know their doctrine or philosophy, didn't know who they were. But I knew I was now unemployed, no longer working as a churchman, and I needed to go to church. And I didn't have any ties in the place that I lived there because I just moved to Weatherford, really. And so I pulled up in front of that old J.C. Penney store, went inside, and there was a secretary there who her husband would later become my best friend. But I asked her about the church. I was impressed by her knowledge. She was another church kid, former church kid, not church kid, preacher's kid specifically. But she's a grown woman, had grown kids of her own. We were close to the same age. We're at the same age. And so I decided to start going to that church. And the rest of the story will have to wait till part 2 of my youth ministry experience, where I talk about how I became a youth pastor. And I talk about this church that I've referenced before as the Devil Fighting Church. I got to say that time in my life was some of the most rewarding time in my life. I enjoyed being a rock and roll Christian music evangelist. It was tough work being having a band and traveling around and trying to do these lock-ins and these youth events and scheduling them and promoting them and creating them and working with youth pastors cross denomination. So my band was charismatic Pentecostal, but we crossed over and did work with Baptists and even community stuff, which was all faiths. And so it was very rewarding. It set me up to become a youth pastor. It set me up to be an actual pastor of a church. And honestly, a lot of the skills that I acquired and developed as a youth pastor, I use on this channel. And if you watched any of my little skit videos, whether it's the intro to Ivelse Orway series, or whether it's the last one I did is called Kill the Bear. But I'm going to start doing these little vignettes, these little skits where I'm the only person in them, and I just wear different costumes because I used to do this for my youth group. And if you watch the second part of this video, you're going to learn how I learned to become a kid magnet and to create a youth group that pretty much funded itself, more or less, with just a little bit of oversight, ran itself, okay, and grew from four kids and five adult helpers. I had 5 adult helpers, 4 helpers and me, and 4 kids on my first night as youth pastor at this church. And how over the course of about 9 months, I blew that up to about a 90-person youth group. And then I grew it to a regional youth movement that when I would have an event, I could raise up to 200 or 300 kids for an event. And then I turned that into a youth camp with a regional. So that's kind of the end of the story there, the framework for it. But you'll watch and learn in the second video of this series how I did it. And I'll take some credit for it, but it's just really hearing God's voice for one thing, but also letting God direct me to the right place, because I invested in a couple of big deals at the beginning of my time there to talk to one of the most well-known and well-respected former youth pastors who had one time had a huge youth group. And I actually gave him a very expensive microphone and bought his time on the Gaithers tour bus. I sat on the Gaithers tour bus in Fort Worth, and I kind of bribed this guy with a microphone to tell me everything he knew about how to be a youth pastor. And then I also went to Tulsa and attended a seminar put on by 180, which is a big youth church, as part of another church in Tulsa. I think it's in Tulsa. You people here from Oklahoma will probably know the church I'm talking about. But that's a church that would bus in, I think, like 1,500 to 3,000 kids every week to this huge youth church that's in a stadium in Oklahoma. And I took my whole team up there very early on, and we learned from the best. And so you'll learn how I did all that, what techniques I used, and you'll hear some of the crazy stories, and you'll get to hear me and see me reminisce on what it's like to finally have a childhood. I feel like I never had a childhood because my childhood was spent being the serious second-in-command kind of soldier behind my dad's ministry efforts. And I never got to run and play with the other kids much. And so being a youth pastor for me, I got to, well, as my boss, the bishop, said, he walked up to me and elbowed me one day, and he goes, "You sure are getting a chance to embrace your second childhood, aren't you?" And I went, "Yeah, it's not my second childhood. It's my first. I didn't get one to begin with." All right, we'll see you next time in this new series when I used to be a youth pastor. All right.
One is through his empty home, surrounded by things. Silently I say a little prayer, yes I do.